Welcome everyone to another enlightening webinar by Elsevier. I want to express my sincere appreciation for all the participants who have joined us today. Your presence and enthusiasm in this virtual gathering are truly valued. This platform acts as a driving force for cooperation, enabling us to overcome geographical barriers and establish connections across borders. It's a attendees from over 20 European countries registered and even beyond, further highlighting the global reach of this event. I'm Vishal Gupta, Senior Customer Consultant for the UK region, and I'm accompanied by my wonderful colleagues, Dr. Pablo, a Customer Consultant for Spain, Greece, Cyprus, and Malta, and Anya, a Customer Consultant for the DACH region, along with our speaker for the day, Hans. Together, we plan to make it worth your time attending this webinar today. A quick disclaimer before we start our today's session on metrics. An important part of research metrics is understanding them, their drawbacks, and best practices. And several set of guidelines are available for the responsible use of metrics as per the Leiden Manifesto, Metric Tide, and DORA. However, we recommend that you consult your institute's research office or librarian to get a better understanding of what is to be followed. We represent Elsevier, one of the largest publishers of STM content and an established information analytics organization. It is our goal to help accelerate the progress of researchers and health professionals through innovation in partnership with the communities that we serve, and to play our part in building a better future for research, health, and people everywhere. And we do this by facilitating insights and critical decision-making for customers across the global research and health ecosystems through popular tools and databases like ScienceDirect, Scopus, SciVal, Pure, Reaxys, Novel, and many, many more. We also have a free online learning platform for the research community, particularly useful for the early career researchers, Elsevier Researcher Academy. The Researcher Academy provides free access to countless e-learning resources designed to support researchers on every step of their research journey. Browse our extensive module catalog to uncover a world of knowledge and earn certificates and rewards as you progress. Now, as some of you may already be aware, this is the 7th webinar in the series of Elsevier webinars for the European region. Our last 6 webinars have been well received and have been attended by over 450 participants across Europe. And the recordings for the same are available on demand on Elsevier's Digital Events Hub. Link for the same is available on the slide below. We will share the slides with you. Please do log on to the hub to view these recordings or to register for our upcoming webinars, which will be listed shortly. Before we move on to our topic for today, request you to kindly go through some of the basic housekeeping rules. Today's session will be recorded, and we will share the slides, recording, and other important links and documents related to today's workshop with all the registrants. We will also share the link to download your certificate of attendance and a feedback survey, which we highly recommend you to fill up, which will help us to improve our services towards the research community. If you have any questions for us or for the speaker, please feel free to post them in the Q&A box visible on your screen. We will take each of the questions after our speaker's presentation. So what are the learning outcomes for today's session? After today's session, you should be able to learn how journal metrics can help in making strategic informed decisions about reading or publishing in a journal. You would also learn how CiteScore is calculated and why it is a reliable alternative metric. And you would also get deeper knowledge about underlying data and the comparison with other journal and article metrics. So research metrics play a crucial role in the research, in accelerating research, and basically quantifying the impact and quality of scientific research. These metrics provide objective measures to assess the significance of research outputs, such as publications, citations, and collaborations. They enable researchers, institutions, and funding agencies to gauge the productivity, influence, and visibility of research work. By employing research metrics, stakeholders can make informed decisions regarding funding allocations, academic promotions, and collaborations, fostering a competitive and thriving research environment. These metrics also aid in identifying emerging research trends, evaluating research trends over time, and benchmarking research performance against peers, ultimately contributing to the advancement of knowledge and scientific progress. They can be broadly divided into three types: journal metrics, author metrics, and article metrics. While we are on the topic, an interesting quote intrigues me. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts, which clearly suggests that not all important things can be easily quantified or measured. And conversely, not everything that can be quantified holds true significance. It highlights the limitations of relying solely on few metrics and emphasizes the importance of considering qualitative aspects and intangible factors in understanding the true value and impact of certain things. To help explain this in detail, it is my honor to invite Hans Zelstra, our key speaker for today. Hans is the Research Metrics Product Manager in Elsevier's Research Products Department in Amsterdam. He has been with Elsevier for over 14 years and is the co-creator of Elsevier's Journal Finder and Journal Insights. He is a science communications and social media enthusiast and an avid art and history lover. We thank you for accepting our invitation, Hans, and being a speaker for our European audience. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Vishal, for this very great introduction. Let me share my screen as well. I hope you can all see it now in presenter mode. I see a thumbs up. So welcome, everybody. My name is Hans Zelstra. I'm, as Vishal already said, the product manager for research metrics. I would always say for Scopus and not so much only for Elsevier, because again, in many cases, we have to think about Scopus as a publisher agnostic database. So today I'm going to talk about how to kick off your journal evaluation with free CiteScore metrics. As you may all know, CiteScore metrics are in the free zone of Scopus. And I think it should be clear that we should firstly think of CiteScore as part of a context, because CiteScore in itself doesn't really have value, I would say. It should always be considered as part of an array of metrics, so part of a basket or array, as you may call it. Let me quickly start with a little introduction. So basically, CiteScore is a relatively new journal metric. As you all know, there was already a journal metric called the impact factor for about 50 years. But in December 2016, Scopus decided to introduce this new journal metric as an alternative to this journal impact factor, but not necessarily a copy of it. Obviously, we'd like to make it a new standard, and I'll tell you more about it in a minute. Currently, CiteScore is calculated based on all active publications in Scopus, so not all publications, but only for the active publications in Scopus, which is currently over 28,100 serial titles, which implies that it's not just about journals, it's also about book series and conference proceedings in a series as well. Important there is that we really strive for a level playing field and that you can verify the calculation. So transparency is a big thing for us. CiteScore in itself is an article-based metric and therefore aggregated to the journal level. And this implies that we only use link citations, citations that we recognize being linked to an individual article, which is slightly different from the way journal impact factor works. That also includes unlinked citations. So if, for example, citations vaguely refers to The Lancet without specifying the article, it's still being counted as a citation in the impact factor. If for one reason today you would not have a lot of time to stay on this call, at least look at this slide for, let's say, saying CiteScore in a nutshell. I have to click away a bit of my screens because I have a few screens open. So basically, what we stand for with CiteScore is a faster journal metric with more global comparison. And what happened over the last 7 years after introducing CiteScore as a journal metric in the first place? What we've done in the year 2020, we've slightly changed the formula of CiteScore after all the feedback we got in the first few years. And the reason for that is that we found out that there was really space for improvement, and especially if you are a new metric, you basically only have one chance to really change it, but you have to do it in the early years of its existence. So what we decided to do is, instead of including all document types, which we did initially, we realized, and also from the feedback we got from the market, which is basically a combination of researchers, librarians, and bibliometricians, that we should focus on document types with research substance. In other words, we are focusing on what we call typically peer-reviewed article types. And those article types are article, review, conference paper, data paper, and book chapter, because we also include, as I already mentioned, book series. We decided to enlarge the publication year window by 1 year from 3 to 4 years, simply for more stable performance. And you can say that a bigger database of underlying data gives a more stable performance. It's not necessarily better than what you see with the journal impact factor, for example, or other metrics, but that's what we've chosen for with CiteScore. And from the feedback from especially bibliometricians, we also addressed the old asymmetry in the numerator and denominator of the calculation. And historically, you see in many cases 1 year of citations divided by 2, 3, or more years of publications. But that was also based historically on the fact that, let's say, the old-time computers couldn't process so much data. Nowadays, that obviously is not an excuse anymore. So we could, and we would decide on that, to change it from this asymmetry to a symmetrical approach where both the numerator and the denominator include 4 years of data. And at the same time, it was important for us, obviously, to look at the different manifestos. Leiden Manifesto, for example, one of the elements in there is to really focus on displaying only 1 decimal. Displaying 3 decimals as such doesn't really make sense. And that is something what is called avoid false precision. It's an impression of the status, the impact state, citation impact status of a journal, but don't make it too precise, because it really doesn't make sense. And DORA in general also refers to that, although it's more focused on the transparency aspect of metrics and the fact that you should never use one metric to assess a situation. So the result of this change in 2020 with the start of CiteScore 2019 and the historical recalculation of all CiteScores back to 2011 meant that we could better reflect the citation impact of a journal really under its 3 main focuses, being comprehensive, current, and clear, but also clearly to make it available for everybody in the free zone of Scopus. What an effect of this change was also is that that CiteScore could be available with the first indicator for especially new, for example, open access journals, but also journals from relatively new scientific and upcoming countries in the Pacific South or in China could have this CiteScore a year earlier than before. But obviously that's depending on the acceptance by the Scopus Content Selection and Advisory Board. In general, you could say that many more journals having a CiteScore than, for example, the impact factor, and therefore you really have a truly global comparison. I'm trying to switch to the next slide. Sorry, it doesn't go directly. What's going on? 1 second. There we go. So CiteScore, in a nutshell, is based on these 3 C's and being free. And you could actually say it's the 4 C's. Comprehensive, because it's based on Scopus, which is, I think, one of the most comprehensive databases available. It's current. It's not only including a monthly CiteScore tracker update, but it's also available for more new serials. And it's clear because the transparency is displayed by not only the value, but really by the elements of it. It's showing you the numerator and the denominator of the equation, and you can click through to the individual articles underneath it. And on top of it, again, it's free, and therefore the 4th C represents complementary. Quickly to show you how that works as a visualization of the definition. So it's 4 years, both in the citation part and in the publication part, numerator and denominator. And it's really about the focus on typically peer-reviewed article type. So we exclude, for example, editorials, we exclude news items, which are mostly represented in the let's say, the big journals like Nature, Science, The Lancet, etc. CiteScore is basically a group of metrics, and it really has these elements, 8 or more elements, you could say, that show not just the value of CiteScore, which you see in this example on the left, 66.1, which is a very high, one of the top journals in general, having such a high CiteScore, but you clearly see that within its range of years, it also has a number of citations. It's obviously a big difference if it's 152 divided by 2 or 152,000 divided by 2,300, which shows you it's a big journal in general as well. And at the same time, on the right-hand side, you see the CiteScore tracker with its elements in detail as well. And underneath it, on the so-called CiteScore source page on Scopus, you see its ranking within certain categories. In general, you see 2 or 3 categories per journal. You see it represented on the right with trend data and also trend lines and graphs, for example. And basically, CiteScore metrics come with additional options. So it's not just about CiteScore itself. It's also available for all the years back to 2011. And as you may have seen, early June this year, we have released the latest CiteScore Tracker 2022, which sometimes sounds confusing, but the 2022 implies that's the most recent complete year that was included in the metric. And at the same time, we also release CiteScore Tracker 2023, which works towards next year's annual value. And by the time, let's say early next year, gives you already a very good indication of this annual value. So we have historical data, we have all the citations and documents that can be exported as CSV format data. We have a free widget, a spreadsheet, and the Scopus API for displaying them on your personal website or your own journal website if you're a publisher. And there are all kinds of further filtering options on Scopus if you are within the context of its source page, where you can look at specifically open access or document types, years of publications, author, especially more details like DOIs and categories as well. What you can also do, and this is still in the free zone, is look at the top right-hand part of the individual source page for a journal. I took an example of brain research, and there you see this, this little text called compare sources. If you click on that, it brings you to a screen like you see on the right-hand side, where you can select up to 10 sources and visualize, or you can also display it as a table on the top right-hand side, quite a few metrics in one context. You can look at the individual source citations by year, but obviously also on CiteScore itself, on the SJR metrics, which are delivered to us on the basis of Scopus by Scimago in Spain, the SNP also by year, which is calculated by CWTS at Leiden University, also based on Scopus, and the individual documents percentage not cited, and for example, the percentage of review articles per year. If you basically look back to 2011, again, the range we cover with CiteScore metrics, you see we're growing every year with about 1,000 titles. That means that we have over 1,000 extra titles, but it also means that sometimes journals that get either discontinued or merged or get another title or are being linked to other titles, they do disappear from the CiteScore metrics, but they stay in scope. So it's really, in this case, showing you what we cover with CiteScore metrics. And again, that's currently over 28,000 titles. And there's also a relatively large chunk of open access publications in there. And I keep emphasizing the fact that CiteScore, and obviously that's based on Scopus, is publisher agnostic. We're currently talking in the context of Elsevier, but Elsevier is really only 1 out of 7,000 publishers that deliver data to Scopus. And it's also not only displayed on journal homepages of Elsevier, but it's also, for example, visible at pages by Taylor and Francis, societies like IEEE, Frontiers, Oxford University Press, NDPI, Hindawi, ACS, Emerald, etc. And I can basically give you another 10 or 15 names. What I'm trying to say here again is Scopus is a source neutral abstract and citation database, which is really curated by independent subject matter expert. It's not an Elsevier database. The Elsevier database is called Science Direct, which is totally different, Elsevier only, and including full text. But here we're talking about basically covering all of science with all publishers delivering content data to Scopus. And before a journal is accepted to the database, it goes through a rigorous process via the independent Scopus Content Selection and Advisory Board. And that means that also Elsevier journals are sometimes rejected because they're either too new and they don't have enough content yet to be judged properly, or they may sometimes simply have not the quality that is necessary to be accepted. And if you want to read about the content policy and selection, there's a page online to show you exactly how that works. And something I also like to emphasize is the fact that Scopus works with local boards, which means that it's not only the goal to include English language publications, but also non-English speaking titles, either from China, but if we look only at Europe, it's including German titles, French titles, Dutch titles. You can imagine there's a lot of titles that simply only need to have an abstract in English, and the rest full text can be in any other language possible. If you, for example, work for a publisher, and I know that our audience today is very varied, there are publishers on the call, there are librarians on the call, there are researchers on the call, but imagine you have a website for whatever your organization is. You can display CiteScore via different means, either via the API. I personally think that's the best way because that automatically updates when there is a new release. And if you are interested in that and don't have it yet, please reach out to your customer consultant who can help you getting the right details and also an API key. There's also a CiteScore widget in case you only work with, let's say, 1 or 2 journals. That's a small piece of HTML that you can copy and paste from the Scopus source page of the journal. You put it in your own HTML and it starts displaying CiteScore as it is. And it also automatically updates at the new release. But if you're interested in really the whole base of data, and you, for example, want to add it to your CRIS system, your local system, via a spreadsheet or a CSV file, we also have that available, either just for the most recent year, but in case you really need more historical data, I can provide that as well. That normally goes via our customer support department, but if you have my personal email address, you can reach out to me as well, and I will send you the file immediately. We don't share it anymore freely on scopus.com/sources for a reason. We really saw some misuse going from there. We didn't really know who was using it. And we saw, for example, it appearing on different illegal websites where potentially also the data may have been changed. And that is something we'd like to avoid, obviously. An example just to show you how you could use the Scopus API is this journal website for the journal called Neobiota by a publisher called Pensoft. It both shows, if you see in the encircled part, the journal CiteScore value, but it also makes it clickable towards the details on the Scopus source page, as well as showing the quartile values. Is it in quartile 1, 2, 3, or 4? And at the same time, they also display the tracker, which is updated on a monthly basis, as I mentioned. But again, you do see my email address here. You can get the Excel file as well. This is just a display of what you would then get. There's a lot of columns in it. You can filter on all kinds of different columns as well, and it's including obviously the data from all publishers, including their open access status within the database. The open access data, by the way, are based on a database from Unpaywall, who take their open access information from several other large open access databases as well. And as you see, there's this CiteScore tracker, and let me quickly address that as well. CiteScore tracker is a monthly updated tracker based on a data set per the 5th of the month. Now, you should always realize it's a snapshot. We take a snapshot of a certain fixed day in the month. We do the calculation. We do some extra checks and also technical checks, and mostly it's then live around the 10th. Mostly a bit earlier, but it depends a bit if there's a Friday or a weekend included, because we don't want to release data in the weekend or on a Friday. Currently, well, that's actually a bit outdated. We currently already have CiteScore Tracker 2023, which is running towards the annual value per June 2024. So that's a little mistake here by me, but I think you get the point. It basically gives you, therefore, an impression of how it goes really at the short term. And as, for example, as an editor or a publisher, you can directly act on it. Am I going up? Am I going down? What are the individual elements that cause this going up or going down? And obviously that can be addressed by looking at the citations, but especially also at your documents. If you decide to, as a publisher, to quickly increase the number of papers, it could imply that your CiteScore goes down because the citations do not accrue as quickly as the number of papers. And again, this indication of documents and citation is linked to a live query, so you can therefore see all the details after clicking. There's no ranking yet, but we do have the filters on open access types, authors, citing journals, etc. Some important dates, and they may be important for publishers, but I think also for librarians and researchers. As I mentioned, CiteScore is available for all active titles with content in Scopus and listed in the so-called source browse file, which is something that I use as the basis of my calculations. The annual value is always based on a snapshot early May. This year it was the 5th of May as well, but we release it a month later because we take some time to also give publishers, which we send the file under embargo, to prepare their promotions and other analysis they'd like to do before the actual release. There's a correction round. Sometimes what you see at release is that certain journals see that their CiteScore is based on incomplete data, which implies that if they realize that they should send a message to our customer support, which then works with them to see if in the upcoming month the missing data can be added in order to be ready by the end of October, in which we do a very small recalculation of those titles that we recognize were missing data and then get an updated CiteScore by the end of the year, which is then re-injected into the database. It's mostly only a handful of titles. What also happens by end October, in the course of November, December, is that we add new titles that have been accepted for Scopus, and as of then, those new titles will get their first CiteScore tracker, which is already a nice first indication. In 2024, we will do this update on a monthly basis instead of twice a year, which implies that new titles get their first CiteScore tracker even faster. Basically, the month after they've been accepted by Scopus, but do realize that it sometimes also takes time to add their content. It comes from a provider, it needs to be normalized, it needs to be, let's say, fixed into a format, sometimes by a translation table, and then if it's available in Scopus, we can do the calculation. Something not to forget, and again, I already mentioned it, is this relatively high number of titles from non-speaking countries, and therefore with their non-English language for full text. This is a little overview with the largest in them, going from Chinese via Spanish, Portuguese, German, French, Italian, Japanese, Russian, and other countries, with some of them also very high in their respective categories. So I'm coming more or less to the end of my presentation, so don't worry, don't fall asleep, because I'm my last few slides. If you want to support your researchers on training them on these journal metrics, I have a lot of information available as a kind of teaching toolkit. We realize that researchers are time poor, so we realize that we need to deliver visual-based information and also try to be as comprehensive as possible at the same time. So we have fact sheets available, we have infographics and other instructional material for your perusal if necessary. There's also an online updated LibGuide, especially librarians like that, which includes a metric section. So that's the Scopus LibGuide. If you have these slides, you can just click on it or just Google Scopus LibGuide metric section, and then you will have a full page on metrics, including video tutorials and all kinds of other useful information. Quickly, some practical examples of how CiteScore is being applied in, let's say, different websites and different tools. There's this academic journal guide for the Chartered Association of Business Schools in the UK, who basically are a base of information for business schools around the world. And they include CiteScore as one of their metrics that is part of their, let's say, advice to researchers where to publish if they want to publish in a journal. They add some other qualitative metrics to it. They add the impact factor as well. But I know that their 1,700 titles are covered 98% with CiteScore. And not all of these titles by far have a impact factor as well. And then we have the example of CiteScore in an application called the Open Access Journal Browser by some Dutch universities. I know of Groningen and Wageningen via this URL and this screenshot you see here. And that's basically using the data set as an open access entry, and also trying to help researchers to find journals that match their field, have a certain level of CiteScore, but at the same time they give information about all kinds of open access information. The Amsterdam University is using a similar interface, but slightly different, and you can look at that via the URL at the bottom. CiteScore as such is also now displayed on the article level. That may sound strange, but what you see is that a lot of researchers are primarily interested in article level information, basically on articles themselves. But if you look at this brain research example, if you simply hit the brain research title above the title of the article, you will see a so-called preview. And this then pops up on the right-hand side, directly giving you both the CiteScore value, SJR and SNP value, and also its categories and their representation by quartile, which also translates into percentiles and a rank. And the last example is for what I use myself quite often is a so-called Scopus alert. For me, the keyword obviously is CiteScore. And if you do that, you get on a weekly basis the latest articles, including this keyword. And obviously for me, that's interesting to keep an eye on what is being published using CiteScore within the research data set. And this is, I think, one of the most recent examples of that. Some highlights for this year release, and I'm a bit surprised that the impact factor still has not released. Maybe today, maybe later this week, I don't know. CiteScore released, as I may have mentioned, on the 7th of June earlier this month, with over 28,000 titles, including this new preview flyout option on the Scopus article level. I do believe that the impact factor will also expand significantly by this year's release, because they add their secondary database to their primary database, going from about 13,000 to 21,000 titles. And they also start adopting this 1 decimal display, because so far they display 3 decimals and they recognize the same thing, which is already on CiteScore, that a 1 decimal display makes much more sense. What you could see is that for example, a CiteScore for a journal may go up, where an impact factor for a journal may go down. And I believe that is another reason to use multiple journal metrics. Use both if they are available and try to see why that is. And for example, in this case, it could be the impact of COVID, which is within 1 year, a very dense impact on the impact factor. And because of the CiteScore 4 years coverage, that is a bit more smoothened, and therefore would give different outcomes as well. The very last slide before I go to the questions is some information you could look up either about me, that's not so important, but more importantly, CiteScore metrics. I have links here to an overall page with all the details and explanations about CiteScore and Scopus. We have an FAQ page with a long list of potential questions and answers, and also some more general info, and an instruction info, as I mentioned before. Instruction video, sorry, in the Scopus LibGuide metric section. So far, so good. Thank you for your attention, and hopefully there's some questions coming up. The floor for the audience.
Yeah, so I would still encourage, thank you so much, Hans, for this informative presentation.
Yeah.
I would still encourage participants, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box. For now, Hans, one question that actually comes to my mind as well is, you talked about that the new CiteScore 2022 has about 28,000 titles that we can see on Scopus. But if somebody goes onto the source page, they are actually able to see more than 40,000, close to 45,000 titles. Why
That's
is
correct.
there difference, and what are the other titles that are available?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, and hopefully I was clear in that, CiteScore is really only calculated for active titles in Scopus. As you can imagine, Scopus is not only covering, let's say, new and current titles, it's also covering historical titles, titles that may have lived until 10 years ago, may have lived until 1 year ago, but at this time simply have been discontinued. So the difference between the 28,000 and let's say the 40,000 plus on Scopus is a combination of titles that have been discontinued for several reasons, as I mentioned. And that could be simply because the publisher stopped. That could be because the title was merged with another title. Then the historical title is still in there. Sometimes titles are split and then there's a new title. There are all kinds of reasons why, let's say, historical titles may have changed or may have stopped, including titles that we recognize of misconduct, because they are then put on a let's say blacklist to at least being further investigated, and for the time being they will then not receive a CiteScore value. Yeah. So that's primarily the reason for this difference between those numbers.
And following up to this, again, this is something that comes to my mind. Sometimes due to this misconduct, some of the articles are removed retrospectively as well. So what happens in that case if an article, let's say from previous years, some of the articles are removed? Does that impact the CiteScore of the previously published CiteScore as well, or?
No, there's a reason why we do not recalculate history. First of all, it's about stability, and we always emphasize you should be aware that Scopus in itself is an active database. Content is being added, some content is being removed, but we always show the situation at the current snapshot date, and the date is always displayed with the CiteScore annual value as well. So it's really historically what happened at that date with Scopus at that date, and whatever happens later, either again citations or content being added or being removed, we don't change history. What we do is we change the latest CiteScore if we clearly see that it makes sense to update a journal, for example. Either again a title is being removed, but then sometimes even a journal with misconduct, its history remains on Scopus, because if the misconduct only started to happen 1 year ago or shorter ago, that doesn't mean that the history is not important anymore. So so we only recalculate once a year for the most current metric. Early November, after a cutoff, we do an assessment of changes after the annual release, and we don't change any more later.
Okay, thank you. There's a question in the chat box, Hans. How the CiteScore relates to the academic journal guide rankings for journals? Does it have any relation at all, or?
So we're not talking about the example I gave for the academic journal guide with the business schools. Is that what you're talking about?
I guess so. I think in the chat.
I do think so, because let me quickly read it
yes,
as well.
So
again, for the broad audience, so we have this example of the academic journal guide for business schools who use CiteScore of one of their journal metrics to assess journals in their field. I would say there is a connection, but not a one-to-one connection, because, as I mentioned, they also take impact factors into account. They take into account qualitative metrics like what is the aims and scope of a journal. Does it do anything with, for example, with SDGs, which is pretty hot lately, and the United Nations, what does it stand for again?
Sustainable development goals.
Sustainable development goals. Yeah, those kind of things are taken into account as well. So that could change the ranking a bit. I don't expect that if a journal has, let's say, #1 ranking in CiteScore, that it suddenly drops dramatically with all the other metrics, but it could drop a little bit, let's say that.
Yeah, no, that's clear. And one again, last thing, the elephant in the room. Traditionally, impact factor has been like, sort of called the gold standard, and people have been using it for a long, because it has existed for a long time. While CiteScore is pretty new.
Yeah.
What is your honest opinion or your feedback regarding how people should be using CiteScore and why they should look at other metrics beyond impact factor as well?
Yeah, I mean, I recognize impact factor as well, right? And I recognize, and I talk a lot to publishers and editors, and it's always, let's say, difficult to change old behavior. So many of them, for whatever the reason is, like to use what they've always used over the last 10, 20, maybe even 40 years. I recognize that, and they should, I think, keep doing that. But the reason why we started CiteScore in the first place is to come up with an alternative after quite a lot of feedback from the market, let's say that there are flaws in the impact factor. So that's why we came up with all the reasons I already mentioned, and at least try to come up something that is at least of additional value to the impact factor, and in some cases a real alternative, for example, for journals that don't have an impact factor at all, for whatever the reason is. And again, we still have, even this year, when they add a lot of titles from their secondary database, we still have quite a lot of more titles covered. And I do think, especially in areas, both geographically, but also, for example, in humanities, that is historically not so well covered in the impact factor, that give people at least the option to compare more in depth, and also do not need really any subscription to get the base data on their laptop. So my point is, use them additionally, or if you don't have an impact factor, go for the CiteScore. It may be the other way around as well. But don't forget to look at more normalized journal metrics like SNP and SJR as well. They have a value in itself, depending on the assessment you do. And in combination with all kinds of other metrics, you can see these different levels. You can zoom in via the details, for example, of a CiteScore into the article level. What do I see? Who are the people who are citing most? Can, for example, I, as a publisher or an editor, recognize authors that cite me a lot? And can I, for example, engage with these people and, for example, ask them to submit their paper next time to my journal? That is something I would do, for example, as a publisher or editor with these available data.
Yeah, so I think in simple words, what you're trying to say is you should always look at both the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of a journal as well. That will give you a holistic view while you're making journal
It's
comparisons.
all about context, right? We're really talking about journals here. You shouldn't use journal metrics as an assessment of an individual or an assessment of an whole organization. Again, you can link to them, but don't use them in an isolation. It's really always about context.
Yeah, perfectly makes sense.
And may I add one thing to it? Again, sure. I have a lot of history and experience with, let's say, alt metrics as well. I used to be one of the co-organizers of the annual alt metrics conference, and I do see additional value to that as well, right? Looking at, let's say, social media metrics, looking at news media, looking at policy documents, that has a value as well. That's mostly on the article level. Yeah. Also available on Scopus, by the way. But it makes the picture much richer than just looking at one metric.
Yeah, and I think it reinforces the quote that I mentioned earlier, right? Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts, right? I think it reinforces that point that you should be very specific about choosing metric. And I think a lot of things would influence which metric you look at. And that together can give you a holistic view of a journal that will help you make informed decisions on your journal selection policy, right?
I mean, adding up all the impressions gives you a good picture. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hans. This was really useful and very informative. And again, I think on behalf of everyone present in the session, we thank you so much for sparing time and sharing this information with us. And
it was a pleasure.
Thank you. A big thank you to all the participants who took out time and attended this session. We are trying to give you back 8 minutes of your day, and we will soon share all the details, as I mentioned earlier, the presentation slides, the participation, the certificate link to your certificate, and a feedback link. And I would request everyone to please take out another 2 minutes and fill up the feedback form. That really helps us in improving our services. Again, thank you to Pablo and Anya as well for assisting us in the webinar. And we see you again in another Elsevier webinar. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good day. Bye.